This episode is in partnership with the Rivoli Arts District, a place where you can watch, learn, and create. Thank you to the RAD for allowing us to utilize this space so we can create anything.
Welcome to She Won Podcast, where we talk about women in sports, life, and everything in between. I am your co-host, Julia, and Angel is not here with us today because, as I mentioned on the previous episode, she is currently going to the Nationals, which I can't be mad at her at all. So I'm happy that she is doing that. So today I got a special guest here. You know, on She Won, we talk about women in sports, but not just what's happening on the court or on the field. We would love to bring the business behind it because it's just interesting to hear about the background of sports. As of right now, the women's sports world is very loud. We got the WNBA negotiations currently going. We have the Women's Soccer League, the NWSL. The franchise valuations are climbing, the expansion fees are rising, but I would love to get deep on beyond those headlines and what's going on because there's a difference between growth and the actual structural strength of the growth that is coming with sports. My guest today came to sports media through an unusual path: Hollywood entertainment development, entrepreneurship, years as a merge and acquisition advisor. That background is exactly what we need to talk about business today. He also is the co-host of Beyond the Surface on the X-Rated Sports Network, where they connect the sports to broader themes, including performance psychology, media narratives, and the evolving relationship between fans, leagues, and content platform. A.M. Pfeffer, welcome to She Won.
Thank you so much for having me. That was so perfect. We might have to have you do the introduction on our show to break down BTS because that was amazing. That's exactly what we need.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I'm excited to get it started in women's sports. But before we get into that, I have to ask about your path because merge and acquisition advisory, Hollywood development, sports media, like it's kind of mixed all over. I'm curious, how does someone end up moving through those different paths?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it actually all starts with Hollywood development. I moved to Los Angeles 26 years ago. And when I first got into town, I wanted to be in production. I wanted to be a producer. That was the idea, a little bit of writing. So took a pretty unusual path in that respect. Just started at one of the biggest talent agencies there were. Lucky enough to get that job at Creative Artists Agency, which if anybody really knows what that is, they understand how big of a conglomerate that is here in Hollywood. And, I had a good 5 or 6 year run in Hollywood and development. I ended up working at a production company that had produced the American Pie movies, the Final Destination movies. I think last year Final Destination 7 came out, so they're still doing it in some capacity. After that, yeah, I kind of fizzled out in Hollywood and made my way over into real estate, into investment, into lending to real estate investors. So I did that for a very long time. But that, look, I'm underneath this shirt is my true love, Indiana University. Shout out to the winners, the true 16-0 national champions this year. Look, I have a business degree from there from the Kelley School of Business, and finally found my way back into business brokerage and M&A advisory, which is what I do now full time. But this is Los Angeles. We all have to have creative outlets out here. So that's the sports media side of it, right? Like why is A.M. Pfeffer, who's a business broker and M&A advisor, also doing it? Because I need the creative outlet. Used to be a writer, used to be in Hollywood, and I need something. So I had started the Jets podcast, New York Jets podcast, and that led me to ultimately join this show, Beyond the Surface, on the X-Rated Sports Network by our founder, Dr. Phil McDonald. So there you go. Kind of circuitous, but I hope that gave the full landscape of how I ended up here.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear because oftentimes when we talk about sports career, people really tend to niche in one thing and go all the way through, especially when you think about athletes. They do the athlete portion their whole lives, and oftentimes they don't really go to explore different avenues. So I always love to hear somebody who is involved in the sports world and then get a chance to explore different avenues and be successful in those avenues that you chose. So that was great to hear. So when you watch sports leagues right now, do you think of it with a different eye, with the business eye versus just
100%.
entertainment?
100%. It's so funny when I was in Hollywood, right? But as a young, like 21 to try to just all through my 20s, right? First it was in development and production, and then ultimately tried to be a writer. I couldn't go to a movie or watch a television show without that feeling of like, oh, I could develop this better, or how is this third act being played out, whatever it is. Thankfully, no longer the case. I actually enjoy movies again and TV again, because it was just like, it was a never ending, like, cycle going on in my head. But now that I'm watching the way I watch sports, it's not like a normal fan. I have to say, I'm not necessarily rooting for players or for teams, though I do still love the New York Jets, a little bit, certainly the Knicks as well. But most of the time, to answer your question, I mean, through the lens of business, and that's really my role on Beyond the Surface. I bring that background. So when we're going quote unquote beyond the surface on something, they're often looking to me as part of the co-host to really talk about the business aspect of the players, the teams, the franchises, and then ultimately the leagues. So to your question, yeah, when I'm watching leagues and thinking about leagues across the board, whatever that is, I am definitely thinking from that business perspective, and it is hard for me to step out of that the same way when I was a development exec or a writer that I would watch a TV show or a film.
I know exactly what you mean because I'm going through that right now. As I started to do the podcast and I went through the editing portion, it really started changing my vision a little bit on how things look. So then the other day, I caught myself watching this movie and I wasn't even interested in the movie story as much as I was interested in the visuals. I was like, wow, the photography of this movie is just beautiful. So I get it.
Isn't it amazing, like,
Hopefully,
how it changes your brain? Like, once you start entering the stream, like, what movie was it, by the way?
I forgot what it's called. It's a new movie that is on Netflix, and it's about a casino. It's this guy in a casino. The movie got a lot of awards, I learned afterwards. But essentially, I was so entertained by the colors of the movie. I was like, wow, there's a lot of touches of red. I wonder what that means because there must be a meaning, right?
There you go. That tells it all, right? The symbolism was more bigger than the plot.
I agree. So with that in mind, like since you have the business vision as you're watching sports, women's sports is trending right now.
Hmm.
There's a lot of talk by the way, ESPN just now added a new women's sports segment into their channel recently the Sundays that was substituted by what used to be baseball.
Hmm.
So when we say that women's sports is one of the fastest growing sectors in sports media right now, what does that actually mean? What metrics are we talking about?
Well, there's probably two. Culturally, that's undoubted, right? That I mean, to the forefront, and it happened, and it's in Hollywood as well. I mean, you see a lot of female-driven movies and television that you didn't otherwise see 5 years ago, and it's the same thing happening in sports. And a lot of that speaks to the idea of that the streamers who dominate the sports landscape now are looking for live entertainment, and they're looking for something that has growth, right? A lot of the men's leagues are already established. It's a fortune to get in the door. It's a fortune to maintain this, even though the revenues are there. But the women's leagues are really still an untapped landscape. They're just starting to come and become, they're just starting to essentially make money and bring in revenue. And everybody's looking at the leagues and saying, "Hey, this is actually going to kick off profit." It's We're on the precipice at the WNBA, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that and how we're stalled right now with the CBA negotiations, which is such a damn shame because the media money is here. But that's really the other part of this is the structure, the pillars of the five pillars structurally of a league that make up, is it now a league? Is this really going to work? And that's effectively media, franchise, expansion fees, corporate sponsorship, right? And then ultimately like infrastructure of owners. Are they throwing money at it? And that's really what we're looking at when we're talking about the leagues. Do they have staying power? Is there growth? And that's what's going on with the women's leagues right now. And a lot of that starts from the media. It always comes back to media. And all of a sudden, there is an opportunity for these streamers because they are so thirsty for live entertainment. And there's a number of reasons why, and we can get into that. But at the ground floor, especially, and that's what's going on with women's leagues right now. It's still ground floor.
So I want to get into that, what you just mentioned. But before, something I noticed you mentioned was the five pillars. So what are those five pillars?
Yeah, again, it's media,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And that really just means the idea of like where you're ultimately going to be able to watch and find, and all of the streaming rights and cable providers and what they're paying for it, because that's really the dominant pillar of where the money comes from. Which again is why it's so big right now in the WNBA. This idea that $2.2 billion is sitting on the table for 11 years, right? And all the money that's coming in there, and again, why the players are fighting for the CBA to have a share of that. And again, we could talk about that a little bit more. But secondly, the second pillar is franchise valuation, right? So the idea of like why do the investors and why do the ownership groups even buy into a franchise with the expectation that it's going to grow? And then third is the expansion fees, what it costs. I mean, that's really when you look at a league and all of a sudden it was like, hey, it was cost us 5 million 10 years ago, and now it's 500 million to get in and buy a franchise. And that's huge. And that's happening in women's sports, especially in the WNBA and especially in
Mhm.
NWLS. And we could
Yeah.
talk a lot about that. That's a really important pillar. Fourth is the corporate sponsorship. And not just corporate sponsorship, not just saying, hey, we have people putting up logos inside of our stadiums or whatnot, but like really long-term deals like Reebok and Nike and, Adidas, like Apple throwing real money at something the way that it has with MLS and sharing in the pie with Lionel Messi. And then finally, and this is a big one too, is infrastructure. This is the fifth pillar, the infrastructure of owners, right? That the owners look at this and say, I'm ready to open my pocketbook and throw money at this.
Gotcha. Thank you for saying that, by the way. That's great insight. So when it comes to media, do you think media influences viewership, or does viewership then influences media? Because when it comes to women's sports, one of the cycles that we tend to be stuck in is that people say that there's not enough investment because there's not a lot of people watching. But then if there's not going to be, if then we're stuck in the cycle because one thing doesn't feed the other. But if there were more investment, then we could have more broadcasting, people watching more, right? So which one do you think is like the first or maybe the most influential?
Yeah, the chicken and the egg conundrum, right? Yeah, don't. I mean, it's all fallacy that the idea that viewership drives the media. No, 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 no. It's complete opposite. It's the other way. The media drives the viewership, and they know that. They're all powerful. They're the media. That's just the way it's been dominated in this country and around the world for 100 years. They put it on television. People are going to come and watch because there's nothing else to do. The
Mhm.
sad reality is people want to congregate around their televisions and their phones, and it's like we spoke about. Live entertainment is where it's everything right now. And sports is live entertainment. It's actually one of the last bastions right now of live entertainment. And why is it so important? Advertising. The whole system is still predicated on advertisements. And until that changes in some big way, that's all it comes down to. And live sports entertainment allows you know, for advertising. And again, with women's leagues, this is something that is exciting. I mean, I know you're a volleyball player, right? I mean, you think about how many people show up live to the events. In some ways, and I'm sure for some times of the season or for playoffs, bigger, but it's not a huge amount. But wow, how many people tune in to watch women's volleyball? A ton, a lot. And there is a lot of advertising in that, and that's what the streamers are thirsty for. So yeah, media drives it, and they know exactly what they're doing. And it's like, if we push this and they market it and they can get advertising dollars for it, they will get viewership.
I agree. I think Unrivaled was able to do a little bit of that by utilizing the decentralized media, utilizing social media and the platform that those college athletes were having by bringing
Hmm.
them in to advertise and rival was one of the reasons why I believe it had a very successful start, especially for a startup league, which is very difficult in any sport. So let's talk about the WNBA. Currently, CBA negotiations are still happening. And there was the Caitlin Clark cultural impact. How do you evaluate the WNBA current business model?
That's an interesting question. The current business model. The current business model for the WNBA, it's actually very good, but the reason it's good is not a great reason. And the reality is because it's tied to the NBA. The NBA owns 50% of the WNBA, and the NBA is such a behemoth that it's effectively acting as an incubator for the WNBA, right? And Adam
Mhm.
Silver is the lead investor. Adam Silver hired Kathy Engelbert, and I think a lot of people forget that she was hired. And where'd she come from? Deloitte. Okay. It's not it wasn't an accident that Kathy Engelbert, with her background, came and became, the commissioner when she did. I think it was July of 2019, which effectively less than a year later, COVID hit the world, and obviously things ended up the way that they are. But like, the WNBA has operated in the red for 30 years. There's red ink on the ledger. Other than a couple of years and a couple ownership groups smattering here and there throughout the, you know, 2012 to 2015, none of the teams have made money. The league itself loses money every year, but it's still a great model because the franchises have gotten infinitely more uh, valuable. The expansion fees are now, I mean, look at the expansion fees. Just take, for instance, 2023, when Joe Lacob, who owns the Golden State Warriors, brought the Valkyries, right? I think is the 13th team to the WNBA. He paid $50 million in that franchise fee, right? Toronto, which now is the 14th team this year, $50 million. Well, guess what? They're already talking about Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia as your another three teams coming to the WNBA. They're talking about $250 million in expansion fees. Okay, the Valkyries came in at a valuation, I believe, at about $500 million. Go back 10 years ago, 2015, 2016, teams were worth $25 million. Now they're all worth between $250 to $300 million. The Valkyries, $500 million. The Indiana Fever, just because of Caitlin Clark, $350 million. So right now, the WA is in a very good place in that respect. Culturally, a very good place. Look at Toronto. You know, one of the other five pillars is this notion of owner infrastructure, right? The fifth pillar. And are they throwing money at the resources for the team, for the travel, for you know, the executives that run the team, for the arenas? Well, yeah, Tenenbaum, who's a big part of that ownership group, he's into it himself for about $125, $150 million. So that alone, that confidence level of somebody throwing that kind of money, they have a belief that the league's in a good place, and then it's going to kick off not just massive revenue in the future, but profits soon to follow.
That's right. So to me, one thing that I find it hard to believe is that a business will operate on the red for 30 years, because nobody's in the business of being a nonprofit, right? So how does
why
that?
did the WNBA operate in the red that long?
Yes, exactly.
Again, because the NBA was incubating it, right? And the reality is this is fairness. This is what ultimately had to happen. But the reality is also that it's still unfair. Why? Well, what's the average team payroll? Do you know what the average team payroll is of the now what will be 14 teams? Before this new CBA came in, I mean, and before the idea of what is being negotiated right now, any guess?
I do not. I would say probably, when you say the team payroll, the whole roster.
The whole roster. What are they paying every woman on each team? Or each team, what is their payroll?
I would say around $5 million.
Okay. It's $1.5 million. Okay. Compare that to the NBA, which is about $132 million in salary cap right now. $1.5 million. That's absurd. And now, like, compared to the idea that the Valkyries, you know, their Valkyries worth $500 million, and you're paying your players a total of $1.5 million to be on the team. Huh? Right? So, there's this big mismatch here, and you understand why there's this you know, uproar in what the players want to be played. Now, however, what are we even really talking about moving the needle towards? Probably only about $4 or $5 million in salary cap. The big issue right now, and the crux of the entire argument, is this idea of gross revenue. Right? The NBA players make about 50% of the revenue that the NBA makes, and the NBA makes, you know, these last 5 years, what was anywhere between 10 to 14 billion dollars in revenue. Again, that's not profit, but that's the revenues. The WNBA now, you're about to get the media again, number one pillar, the number one thing, right? The $2.2 billion coming in from media over 11 years is going to bring another 150 to close to 175 million every year to every team, at least the 13 teams or the 14 teams that are there now. And that's a lot of money. And the players are like, hey, we want our share of that. But are they asking for too much is really the big question, because they want gross revenue of those media rights. Well, I do agree that they have to stand on, you know, the rock and raise the flag about this and be like, hey, gross revenue in something for sure. But I don't know if the 30% they're asking for, even now, what is now 26, 27, it still doesn't compute. Kathy Engelbert's probably right about that one talking point. It can cost the league hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's a problem. But you should X or 4X the salaries of everybody, and then give some gross revenue of something, whether that's the ticket sales or corporate sponsorship or merchandising, whatever it may be. And the reason I say that is because the players have a right to start getting a taste of gross, not net. And that's really the other part of this. Like, that's the slap in the face that's just terrible. If you're renegotiating with your players and saying, no, you're going to get a piece of the net revenue, well, that's ridiculous, because the accounting rules allow you to do whatever you want to make it look like the net is nothing. You got to get some percentage of the gross. The players are right about that. but it can't be 26% of media rights. It could pontoon the entire league.
Yeah, I agree. I think when what they asked for was initially 30% is a pretty high number. And I was thinking the same thing. It's hard when you say gross because then it just becomes complicated, especially considering the fact that the W has multiple owners, like when you compare to the NBA. So then it just becomes very complicated to make it sustainable long term. But I do believe that the salary cap should be higher and the housing, which is something that is also hard to do when you are transitioning between teams, when you're going in for a short period of time.
Okay, now
I honestly
this is interesting. I love where you're going with this because that speaks to the fifth pillar, that infrastructure, and the owners have to come out of pocket ultimately and be comfortable with this. And again, you look at what's going on in Toronto and what he's willing to throw at the money, or like what Joe Lake. I mean, Joe Lacob, right? For years before they put in the first and second apron in the NBA, was like, I don't care, luxury tax me, whatever, I'll pay for everybody. Get Kevin Durant on the team. I just want championships, right? Like Steve Ballmer is like, whatever, I don't care, billions of dollars. And half the owners of the WNBA teams, by the way, are NBA owners, which means they're billionaires. So this is dropping the bucket money to them. So yeah, the players should absolutely kill for the housing, and that's got to be a part of it. But the housing also comes with the belief of the owners and the belief of the league that there's infrastructure enough to bring this along to a place of profitability and sustainability to scale for years.
I agree. Perhaps if they had a longer season, they could accumulate more revenue, bring more revenue into the league, which is a point that was not a point that the players were unhappy about, but they were definitely something that they had to adapt. And having some more games happening cause injuries, cause exhaustion. But the WNBA allows for players to not be exclusive to the W. So they get a chance to go and play another season. So they essentially don't get a rest. They go from one
Mhm.
league to the other, which I think is a point that the WNBA is lacking. They should make players exclusive, but they will only be able to get to that point once they're actually paying the players what they should be getting.
Undoubtedly, and that's such a great point that you're making, that that the women have to work full year round as athletes and condition and take care of themselves, and the men do not have to go through that the same way. I mean, obviously they have to stay in shape and do what they want, but like they're getting paid so well that like when it's the off season, they don't have to go do some other job. And it's brutal. It's a brutal grind, and it's completely unfair. And if you're talking about an average salary for a female player at 100, well, 100 grand doesn't go very far anymore at all, as we know, especially when those
Mhm.
paychecks are not even half the year.
I agree. Or when you are living in New York, that can also be a problem, or California.
Undoubtedly, right? And a lot, and depending on where you are actually living, and this is a part of the NBA or any league, you're subject to state tax. Why do you think people want to go play in Miami, right? Florida doesn't have a state income tax, or Texas, no state income tax. That's big. It means something.
I agree. That makes a difference. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. So I want to pivot for a second because you're known for using the New York Jets as kind of an ongoing case
Oh,
study
man, do we have
for
to go here? Do we have to go? Do I
just for a little bit. What should they avoid if we were to use the New York Jets as an example?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the fish rots from the head, so avoid ever having Woody Johnson own you because he's about the worst. No, but seriously, I mean, this is where it all stems from. You're when you're the top of the food chain, when you're the owner, and when you're meddling. When you have your basically like prepubescent children coming into the locker room and making decisions based on like video game ratings. I mean, where are we even at? What are we even talking about, right? It's ludicrous, and you're embarrassing yourself. When you take a job because you go across the pond like he did to England and become the ambassador and leave your bonehead brother in charge for a few years, and it just gets worse from there. And then you try and come back and instill some culture problem. I mean, the Jets have made a history of overplaying marquee players to come play for them in free agency because they've done a terrible job cultivating their own talent, and the only way for these players to come play for them is to pay them the extra 10 or 20, 25% that they wouldn't otherwise get playing in Kansas City or Seattle, because again, those are better organizations and where players would actually want to go. But they're saying, cool, I'll go have fun in New York, and they're paying me stupid amounts of money because that's the only way I'm actually going to go play there. Another great example is don't get into the cycle of hiring second, third, and fourth tier coordinators like the Jets have done as your head coach for years. The problem is they can't ever attract the big names, the essentially CEO type coaches who shake free. When Andy Reid shook free from Philadelphia, no chance he was coming. When Mike Tomlin and there were tremors that he might leave Pittsburgh years ago, no chance he was ever coming to the Jets. Sean Payton, when he got out of New Orleans, no chance he was ever going to land on the Jets. Mike Vrabel recently, I mean, used the Jets as leverage to get a better deal out of New England. Bill Belichick famously was the coach of the Jets for one day until he realized, I can't do this for my life, and literally retired and moved on and, went on a 20-year history in New England. Like, this is the problem. You basically created an organizational structure that is toxic, that is poison, that is keeping people away. And that is just a vicious loop. Prime example, the growth that it's been waiting for in all the major pillars, right? In the structural pillars. And that's exciting. That's amazing, which is why this CBA, why the fact that the train has stopped rolling is so infuriating. And here we are
Mhm.
talking on March 4th. We're 6 days away from ground, from that's it, from 0 hour.
Mhm.
And losing a season here again and losing all the momentum. And it is brutal and it's infuriating. And it's such a shame because the WNBA is on the rise in every other metric. And this season needs to be played. Absolutely.
I agree. I'm really hoping that the season is going to happen, and it's not looking like it's going to be starting when it's supposed to. I'm not so worried about the momentum because I do believe that women's basketball is going to keep growing. It's more popular than ever and will keep increasing. But it is very unfortunate if we don't get a league this year. You mentioned about
It,
the
it,
the.
it,
Go ahead.
it wouldn't just be unfortunate. I think it would be pretty detrimental to the league's growth for a period of time. I mean, like anything else, it will come back. It will be okay. It will move on. But yeah, lost time and energy and revenue. Don't do that. And especially with some of your young stars who are really capturing the attention of the fan bases, don't let them grow another year older, let alone another minute older.
Agree. We you mentioned about the women's soccer league, which is more
Hmm.
recent than the WNBA. In the women's soccer league, it's interesting to me, especially when compared to the MLS. So the
Hmm.
MLS has a model where it has the youth academy structure attached to it. So it creates
Hmm.
the identity for being so young, growing into the academy, and then potentially like breeding its own soccer players, which I believe it builds
Hmm.
a long-term asset because those soccer players are able to be sold to different clubs, bigger clubs that pay big money for them. So the NWSL are replicating some of those models
Hmm.
that are currently happening with the MLS. I was curious about your thoughts on having a youth academy attached to a franchise organization and the benefits of doing such things.
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I mean, to me, it's a no brainer. As especially because Europe was doing it and has been doing it to great success for years. So you understand why the MLS is trying to ultimately model that. But to me, that's such a small fraction of what's intriguing about the NWLS, especially in comparison to the models. Like the MLS is effectively one entity. Right? It's not individual owners. The NWLS is individual ownership groups. And in such a short amount of time, they've already made massive leaps and bounds in the pillars, in the idea of what the franchise fees are and the value of the franchises themselves. That's tremendous. I mean, the MLS, I think it's up to 29 or 30 teams right now. Like, it took a long time to get started, and they did it as a loss leader. They kind of ran it like venture capital. I mean, the inside joke, what is it? It was a Ponzi scheme, right? Because the way the model works for the MLS is franchise fees had to pay for all the new for everybody else that came in. I mean, obviously there was no fraud or deception. This was all above board, so it wasn't really a Ponzi scheme. Jokingly, that's kind of the model of what the MLS looked like until it ultimately became sustainable, and now it's profitable and moving in the right direction. And $2.5 billion infusion from Apple for the streaming rights. But the NWLS, like, they learned from all the other leagues. They looked and said, "Hey, this was done twice with female soccer, and it failed both times. We're not going through that again. We need, stability. We need owner infrastructure. We need to hit those 5 pillars." They were smart enough to look at it and say, how do we immediately go with the 5 pillars? And I really go back to media, the number one pillar. And it came along at a time, okay? The NWLS came along at a time right around 2012, 2013, when this all was working in its favor with media, all live sports. And we go back to the idea, and I really want the listeners to really think about this. That's everything. That live sports are really where it's at for television and for media streamers, and why they're so excited about women's leagues and women's sports because again, it's ground floor. It's still not that expensive, but they can push that product. They can push live sports because that is what people are thirsty for. And that is what they can attach advertisers to, right? There are so few other outlets now, the way that television shows are made and movies are put out and everything else that's out there. I mean, there are really the only thing left is live sports.
That is true. So what are fans of women's sports currently not paying attention to that they really should be? Either now or in the short term in the next 2 years.
Exactly what we're talking about. I mean, if you're a fan of women's sports and the idea of where the leagues are ultimately going to come on, like yeah, you could talk about the teams and the players and everything about that, but it's exactly what we're talking to. I mean, I think to be a fan is to be a fan not just of a team or a player, but of the league and of the structures and of how the business operates. This is what the fan should be paying attention to right now. That the media is pushing them to watch this product and they want this to succeed. They want volleyball to succeed and turn into a professional sport. They want women's hockey to have their own league and start succeeding. They want the NWLS to be as big as the MLS. Look, I think San Diego, is one of the newer franchises in the NWLS. It's already worth 120, 130 million dollars. I think that's tremendous on what it was purchased for. And at some home games, 30,000 people have shown up to a game live. And that's the other thing I want people to pay attention to. It's really not about the idea of like the WNBA to think that less than 10,000 fans show up to a game every time, or that the merchandise doesn't move like the NBA, or that corporate sponsorship deals aren't as big across the board. Just pay attention to the media, right? There's a reason why $2.2 billion has been given to the WNBA over 11-year period now. And that's exciting. Now, I do want to say this a little bit again is tethered to the NBA. Kathy Engelbert likes to take a lot of credit for the idea that she ended up negotiating that. I don't know. I mean, it didn't happen in a vacuum. And I think people need to remember that. And what I mean by that is it happened alongside when the NBA negotiated their deal for over $70 billion. And it was like, hey, the NBA was kind of also saying you must give the WNBA, the media rights, but the media said okay because when they crunched the numbers, it still made sense. And it was right because people do want to watch the WNBA and it is a great product that is up and coming with exciting young players.
Absolutely. What is a common misconception that people have when they talk about sports economics? Or more specifically, let's talk about what women's sports economics that needs to die. Like we need to kill it.
The attendance records. Don't
Okay.
look at the attendance records. That is the number one misconception right now. It does not matter if 4,000 people show up, 9,000 people show up, or people are lined up around the block to see Caitlin Clark play when she comes to your city. Again, that's all just like, don't look what's happening in this hand so we could show you what's happening in this hand magic, right? It's all
Hmm.
about the media. The reality is that attendance isn't a pillar, right? It's not one of the
Yeah.
5 pillars we talked about. So don't let it be a misconception. Pay attention to the idea of what the franchises are worth, which again, going back 10 years ago in the WNBA, $25 million on an average, now $250 to $300 million with the idea of the Valkyrie coming in at a $500 million valuation back in 2023. And then look at the franchise fees. Joe Laco paid $50 million, Toronto paid $50 million, and they're talking about $250 million franchise expansion fees for Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Detroit. That is massive right there. You've absolutely secured a $2.2 billion rights for 11 years. That pillar's there. And you have owners spending money and you have corporate sponsors. This is what fans need to pay attention to. Will my league survive? Is this going to expand? Should I care about this? And especially with corporate sponsorship, because in the age of social media, that is how the youth align themselves, brand alignment. And
Uh-huh.
that's how we all look, right? I'm wearing whatever shirt from wherever. I mean, obviously you have your She Won podcast shirt on, but how people are, they care about being allegiant to Nike or whatever, I mean,
Absolutely.
that's a big thing. That's a big thing.
I couldn't agree more. Like I walk around watching different sporting events and I see different shirts that say everybody watch women's sports because a brand put that phrase on a shirt. So now everybody wants to wear it. So that's definitely something that it changes the culture. People attach themselves when they identify with something.
Yeah, look, I'm Generation X, so when I grew up, everything was the anti that, right? It was anti-culture and like everything was like, don't be sold on anything and and like sell out or whatever. And now it's like, no, it's great. Brand alignment's great. You go on Instagram and it's like everybody's like specifically doing what they're on TikTok and everything to like align themselves for a brand.
That's true. With their mission, their vision. I agree. That's all we talk about now.
That's
So
all we talk
between, I agree. Like between there's different business model for different leagues. So if we use, let's say, we got the WNBA, we have the Unrivaled business model, we got Project B coming up. There's the NWSL. There's so many different leagues with different business model. Which one do you think has the strongest one long term?
That's a good question. I default back to the WNBA, and again, admittedly not for a good reason, but because it's the NBA's baby, and the NBA has incubated it. It will not let it fail. I mean, everybody else is kind of out on their own. Even the
Mm-hmm.
NWLS, which I think is great, and I think volleyball will do well. I think again, women's hockey will come up and start doing well as well. I mean, all the leagues effectively, again, because live entertainment, the is there for all of it. I think it's all going to be just fine. But which one is aligned to do the best? It's definitely the WNBA. I mean, it has behind it the NBA, and the NBA is as big as it gets. The NBA and NFL are like it's incomparable to every
Mm-hmm.
other league around the world. I mean, well, no, that's not fair. I should not say
The
that.
soccer.
Yeah, the soccer leagues. That's not, that was wrong of me to say. That it's definitely very different. But outside of soccer, which is of course the world sport, I mean, basketball is so massive and growing around the world. And now we see the NFL games starting to show up in Brazil and in Germany and a number of times a year in England and soon in Spain next year and in Mexico City. So that's happening as well.
What I think it's great for them to do to actually expose American football to the world because, I mean, me being from Brazil, my whole life, I never even care about football whatsoever.
Mhm.
Not because it is not an interesting sport, it just wasn't on TV. So we don't know about what is going on, but it's great that they're trying to expand in the best ways by going and introducing themselves in different arenas. One thing that is interesting with the soccer model in Europe, I'm actually going to use not only Europe but a lot of parts of the world, is that it's beyond just a franchise. So the whole soccer club feeds into a bunch of different sports. It's very different. This could be a whole another podcast on its own. And I think it's very different than the US, where it's almost like each sport franchise, each institution is on their own.
Mhm.
In this way, with the sports portion in Europe, I think it just goes beyond them. It makes the city super proud because they get to watch their team play in different sports. And it creates this structure that is so sticky because people will go to different sporting events and that just feeds into the whole organizations. But obviously, like each sport has its own structure. Not to go on a whole rant, but it's definitely an interesting model to learn about
No,
as well.
I love it. I'm so glad you brought it up. I mean, ecosystem, such a buzzword, and that's really what it sounds like you're describing. And they've tapped into something pretty special.
I agree. And with volleyball, though, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good comments. I mean, I am happy that they're finally having professional leagues coming up in the United States because it's about time. But I'm worried because there's so many of them coming up at the same time. And I think it creates kind of like a distraction because people don't know which league to watch. There's the Sports Unlimited League, the new MLV coming up. There was the Pro Volleyball Federation. So there's just so many of them that it gets hard for the public to follow.
Which
And
one do you enjoy watching most yourself?
I think the Pro Volleyball Federation is the closest one to the format that I'm used to seeing, where a team is being under the umbrella of a city. So then you can just go and watch in their arena and they go play different teams from different cities. I think that's the most interesting one. I think Sports Unlimited, it's a little hard because one of the things that makes sports interesting is the fact that those players are playing under a team. And Sports Unlimited doesn't have a team. Is essentially they're representing. They have captains. And every week the team changes. So I don't think that's really cool to watch because then you're not really cheering for a team. You're cheering for a player at this point. Yeah, which is probably the reason why it hasn't been as successful as it could have been. I have one more question for you, which is beyond the surface, your show, a conversation that you haven't had yet that you really want to have. And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be women's sports.
No, that's a great question. I think it's a larger conversation because we've done a great job, I think, in the first 6 months of bringing older players and older coaches who are no longer in the league and a lot of announcers or individuals who are part of the media on our show. But we don't yet have anybody who's playing in games or playing in leagues currently. We really haven't had that on the show just yet. And that is the conversation I want to be having. I want to talk to people who are actually still part of the games and part of the excitement and part of the leagues right now. So we're building towards that. And we've had some incredible guests and some incredible, not to use the term affectionately, but the old heads have come on our show and it's been amazing. And we've had just awesome conversations and to hear from them and their thoughts on not only what they went through, but what's going on in the leagues today. But, I think we want people who are playing currently.
Cool. Okay. Well, if you're listening to this right now, please go tune in to a Pfeffer show Beyond the Surface on X-Rated Sports Network. You're going to be able to find the link in the description. And if you want to keep tuning in to women's sports, please make sure to subscribe to She Won Podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the comment. We really appreciate you. And I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much, Am, for coming to the podcast.
Julia, thank you. This was a great day. Amazing questions. Really appreciate it. Love what you're doing.
If you want to see more from She Won Media, follow us at She Won Media in all social media platforms.